Hello, ladies and gentlesaurs. Welcome to Assessing Survival, the series where we take creatures from both reality and fiction, placing them in different periods throughout history, as well as some from outside the scope of our world. With the recently released Fallout TV show, which is friggin' phenomenal, by the way, definitely the best video game to live action adaptation by far. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the Fallout universe ourselves by taking the iconic mutant super predator of the post-war wasteland, the Deathclaw from Fallout, and placing them in Late Cretaceous Asia, specifically Mongolia, about 70 to 74 million years ago. I've chosen this area because, much like the wastelands of Fallout, Mongolia during the Late Cretaceous is believed to have large swaths of arid and semi-arid ecosystems, but also because of the animals that inhabit this area. In this dinosaur-populated desert, the Deathclaw will encounter animals such as Tarbosaurus, Velociraptor, Mesozoic, Therizinosaurus, and many more. As per usual, I will be using 4 different categories to assess the Deathclaw's ability to survive. Said categories are environment suitability, strengths and weaknesses, prey items, and threats and competition. These 4 scores will then be added up for a final assessment score, and as per usual, we will speculate some ways these animals could evolve to better fit their environment. Of course, before we get into said categories, a little background on the Deathclaw is in order. Created by the pre-war United States government using a combination of animal DNA as well as the FEV virus, the Deathclaw's purpose was to replace human soldiers in close-quarters combat, likely dropping them behind enemy lines or perhaps into enemy settlements. They were a melting pot of different types of animal DNA, the majority of which is unknown. However, we do know that the foundation of their genetic code is from that of the Jackson's chameleon. The Deathclaws were obviously a successful experiment on the government's part, but unfortunately, the Deathclaws, as far as we know, never saw widespread deployment in combat, of course due to the Great War, a swift and sudden nuclear Armageddon that sets the events of the games into motion. The bombs presumably damaged the facility where the Deathclaws were kept, allowing them to escape and quickly spread throughout the wasteland. Here's some things to consider before we dive into this. These animals are from a video game, where fun takes priority over realism, but I'm gonna try my best to take both realism and in-game characteristics into account. We'll be using just the average Deathclaw for this experiment, not any of their crazy variants. Information in this video is sourced from Nukipedia, the games, as well as this fantastic video by the Unnatural History channel. Be sure to check it out. If you like my content, you'll love his. But without any further delay, let's get into the categories. Environment suitability. Unfortunately, while information about the Deathclaw is certainly more fleshed out than that of creatures from other games, there are still plenty of things Bethesda doesn't explicitly state about the Deathclaw. But we can deduce from the games that the environments these guys are willing and able to inhabit varies greatly. Deathclaws can be found in the hot deserts such as the Mojave, as well as colder regions as far north as Maine. Given the success of the Deathclaws in the Mojave Wasteland and Fallout New Vegas, I don't see the mildly humid, semi-arid environments of ancient Mongolia being too much of a hard adjustment. To put a little cherry on top, Deathclaws also inhabit rad wastes, which are genuinely unlivable for most forms of life, save for the few irradiated monstrosities adapted to them. With this, and given how quickly they spread across North America, they could easily go on to expand their ranges, even beyond the area of their initial introduction. Environment suitability score, 10 out of 10. Strengths and weaknesses. The US government, of course, bred these guys to be pretty tough and useful in combat scenarios, and we see that in gameplay. In the Fallout games, your average Deathclaw can absorb a considerable amount of arms fire from the player, ranging from small caliber rounds to armor-piercing rifle rounds, even plasma fire. Some Deathclaws are even capable of absorbing several rounds of 50 BMG. Now, that doesn't give us the most solid idea of how they would match up against other animals, but it's pretty telling of how much damage they can take before succumbing to their wounds. Luckily, we do have some examples of how they match up against other life forms in their ecosystem. The Deathclaw in most scenarios can best Yaogwai, fire geckos, rad scorpions, mirelurks, super mutants, wild dogs, and even Brotherhood Knights in full power armor. Being designed for military and modern warfare engagement, the Deathclaw comes with a wide array of weaponry at its disposal that really make it a nightmare to deal with. The obvious one, of course, being their claws. Each one of their fingers end in very sharp claws that can bisect an unarmored human and other animals with a single swipe. In addition to the claws on their hands, they have one sickle-shaped claw on each foot, much like those of dromaeosaurs. They come equipped with most often forward-facing bull-like horns that could certainly be used for goring prey items and competition alike. Along with their impressive weapons and armor, Deathclaws have an impressive level of intelligence, likely bestowed upon them by their creators, to be able to coordinate with each other in battle scenarios. The average Deathclaw has the intelligence of a human child, perhaps exceeding that of creatures such as parrots and apes. In-game examples of this intelligence we see are combat behaviors such as throwing up dirt or sand into the eyes of their opponents, as well as launching cars, suggesting that they definitely have an understanding of projectiles and their lethality. A Deathclaw's hide is quite durable, being incredibly resistant to blunt force and edged weaponry, also being able to withstand swipes from larger animals such as Mirelurk queens. Like I mentioned before, they can absorb a lot of bullets and energy-based attacks. But that's not to say that 50 caliber rounds are just bouncing off of them. It's far more likely that the US government modified the Deathclaw to have enlarged and advanced adrenal glands that allow them to produce enough adrenaline to keep them fighting despite being mortally wounded. The scope of their ferocity only increases when you take into account that these monstrous creatures live in groups. We see that Deathclaws live in family units with quite complex hierarchies, consisting of a dominant matriarch, a dominant alpha male, and their offspring of varied ages, as well as possibly the siblings of the dominant pair. This type of reproduction is called cooperative breeding, which can be seen in animals like meerkats, magpies, some packs of wolves, and many species of birds. It's a way of ensuring the success of not only the individuals most closely related to them, but the species as a whole. What's more impressive is that the Deathclaws managed to implement this kind of reproductive strategy on a freshly eviscerated nuclear wasteland, which strongly suggests that Deathclaws may be able to survive on very little food and water for extended periods of time, or that they can get sufficient calories from irradiated corpses and things such as bones. In an environment like Cretaceous Mongolia, where calories are infinitely abundant in comparison, you can imagine just what kind of a ride the dinosaurs are in for. Unsurprisingly, the Deathclaws have very little weaknesses. Now this is more speculative because we don't really get numbers in the games or on the wikis. While Deathclaws are still faster than humans, they're not faster by much. The average human male can run at 8 miles per hour or just below 13 kilometers per hour. In most of the Fallout games, the Deathclaw is only marginally faster than the player. Again, this is a gameplay mechanic and are likely much faster in lore, so I'm going to guesstimate their average speed is anywhere between 30 to 35 kilometers per hour, or 18 to 21 miles per hour. We don't really have any real-world analogs to determine just how fast they could run, so I think this range for a max speed suits them. This could be a serious setback for them in Cretaceous Mongolia. Something that might be another downfall for them could be their hyper-aggression. We observe Deathclaws attacking creatures much stronger than them, such as Mirelurk queens and super mutant behemoths, often resulting in their demise. I believe this to be a side effect of the incredibly high adrenaline levels that I theorized on earlier. A single Deathclaw running up to a herd of sauropods clearly isn't going to end well for them, but honestly I don't see this being enough of a problem to drastically affect their success in the ecosystem. Strengths and weaknesses score 8.7 out of 10. Prey items. Alright, by the last category alone you're probably deducing that the Deathclaws are going to do pretty well. But let's not jump to a conclusion just yet. I'd still like to go over some of the prey items that Deathclaws will have at their disposal in Cretaceous Mongolia. For this, as well as their competition, we'll be using animals found in the Nemegd formation, as well as the Zhedagda formation. In these formations, we have a menagerie of dinosaurs that will be on the menu for the Deathclaw. The easiest prey items for them hands down is going to be Protoceratops. With a max speed of 10 miles per hour, a Deathclaw could simply pick it up like a nice set of short ribs and dig in. Then we have Homalocephalae and Praenocephalae, both small herbivores that are still large enough that they may be worth pursuing. We don't know exactly how fast they might be, but given that estimates for Pachycephalosaurus, their larger relative, sit around 24 to 32 kilometers per hour, to take these guys down, they may have to rely on ambushing or pack hunting tactics. There's also Gallimimus, which isn't exactly a small herbivore, but their speed estimates are pretty much the same as the estimates for Pachycephalosaurus, with a max speed of 54 kilometers per hour. Given this, the same likely applies to the Galli, as well as other ornithomimids. Certainly a worthy meal, though a difficult one. After those smaller herbivores, we have the larger herbivores, such as hadrosaurs like Saurolophus and Barsboldia. Saurolophus was a very large hadrosaur that reached up to 40 feet or 12 meters in length, making them obviously quite a bit bigger than the Deathclaw. However, in terms of defenses, sure, their size and weight could likely do damage to a Deathclaw, but I doubt they have the maneuverability to apply this in a fight with a Deathclaw. A Deathclaw could pretty easily ignore any intimidation attempts, swipe at this animal's throat and cause it to bleed out rapidly, or jump onto them and slash at their sides many times over to achieve the same result. The only hope these animals have is that their numbers will keep the majority of them safe. and that the Deathclaws will have the appetite for just one of them. Then we have the armored dinosaurs like Tarkia, among other ankylosaurids. Armored dinosaurs like Tarkia are significantly heavier than Deathclaws, weighing close to 4 metric tons, a weight that makes them very slow, with estimates not going higher than 16 kilometers per hour. This makes them a very easy target for the Deathclaw in terms of pursuit. However, it's not likely that the Deathclaw can penetrate the Tarkia's bone armor. While in the games we do see them attacking and even killing people in power armor, that's not to say that they're slicing through it or penetrating it. Instead, a Deathclaw might be able to flip a Tarkia over to access its unarmored belly. The Tarkia's clubbed tail, however, could deliver up to 48,000 newtons of force upon impact, which can not only break the bones of animals much larger than it, but almost assuredly for Deathclaws as well. This tail swing is only estimated to have a 100-degree radius, so the Deathclaw really only needs to avoid the rear end of the Tarkia. But that's not to say they shouldn't be careful. The Tarkia could quickly swing its body around and bring the Deathclaw within that swing radius. I think this armored dinosaur is better avoided than preyed upon. Then, of course, we have sauropods like Deinocheirus. There's also a unnamed titanosaur in Mongolia that is only known by footprints that is likely almost as large or as large as Argentinosaurus. One-on-one, a Deathclaw isn't likely to take on a sauropod. The animal is simply far too large for a single Deathclaw to risk attacking. These guys weigh more than 20 tons. But remember, these unholy abominations are intelligent, social animals with great learning capabilities. All it takes is for one Deathclaw to figure out it can use its claws like ice picks to climb up the sauropod and go for the base of the skull to kill it. This Deathclaw could then go on to teach their offspring and relatives, and within a few generations, we have Deathclaw packs that are professional sauropod hunters. So, despite only being a little bit faster than humans, don't think it'll affect their ability to acquire calories too much. It very well may be the case that Deathclaws are better suited for hunting larger, slower, but more dangerous prey items. With our theory that Deathclaws can survive for extended periods of time, on very little food and water, the abundance of calories in something like a hadrosaur or sauropod could feed a family of Deathclaws until it's fully consumed or decomposed. That being said, will the Deathclaws gorge themselves and overhunt, or will their origins in the wasteland allow them to ration themselves? Prey items, 9 out of 10. Threats and competition. Now, you may be wondering why I didn't mention Deinocheirus or Therizinosaurus in the previous category. And that's because I don't think these animals are worth the reward or the risk that they pose. Both Deinocheirus and Therizinosaurus are of course known for their large claws. Deinocheirus, the likely heavier of the two, spent most of its time wading in the water of the wetlands and swamps. While of course not as large as those of Therizinosaurus, Deinocheirus' claws could definitely do some damage to a Deathclaw. But honestly, they may not have to worry too much about Deinocheirus, because as we see in the games, Deathclaws don't really know how to swim, or at least they just don't very often. While I'm not saying Deinocheirus won't be a threat to Deathclaws, I really don't think they'll interact on a common enough basis to impact their score. Unlike Deinocheirus, Therizinosaurus inhabits more forested areas, making Deathclaws far more likely to come across these guys as they're expanding. Therizinosaurus had literally meter-long claws at the end of already pretty long arms, which gives them an insane wingspan of over 3.8 meters. It could probably rip open a Deathclaw with one swipe. Even a pack of Deathclaws would have a lot of trouble with these guys. If the Therizinosaurus is able to keep its backside away from the Deathclaws, it might be able to convince the Deathclaws it's not worth fighting. But we know the temperament of the Deathclaws gets them into fights with animals much larger than themselves. Generally speaking, I think Deathclaws will avoid Therizinosaurus in most cases. But in the event that a pack of them gangs up on a Therizinosaurus, the superior intelligence of the Deathclaws will win them the encounter. Which brings us to the animals that Deathclaws will be competing with directly. And there's really only one. I had thought about mentioning Velociraptor, but the only type of interaction I can see between these two animals is Velociraptors occasionally trying to steal a carcass from one lone Deathclaw, or stealing their eggs. Were they larger like their cousins the Achillobator, they would definitely stand more of a chance, but that's just not the case. Which of course leaves us with Tarbosaurus. Tarbosaurus batar is a little bit taller than the Deathclaw, coming in at 9.8 feet or 3 meters at the hip, and a length of 33 feet or 10 meters, weighing up to 4 tons. Tarbosaurus had a much slimmer skull than T-Rex, with much more teeth, but was still more than capable of crushing bone with a bite force of nearly 10,000 psi. That amount of force would mitigate any amount of armor the Deathclaw has. However, while in the jaws of the Tarbosaurus, the Deathclaw's absurd adrenaline levels could allow it to do damage on its way out, scratching and clawing at the theropod's face and throat before succumbing to its wounds. And the Tarbosaurus would later bleed out and succumb to its own, making the interaction a lose-lose scenario. However, there's more layers to this. The problem with the classic big head, little arms theropod build is that this body plan is not well suited for dealing with opponents who have dexterous forelimbs and high intelligence. If the Tyrannosaur were to fail to get a hold of the Deathclaw somehow, the Deathclaw could throw sand or dirt up into its eyes before closing the distance and slashing its throat open.
Pocket sand!
However, what's more interesting about this matchup is that while evidence of social behavior may not be observable in Tarbosaurus specifically, it has been found in close relatives like Displetosaurus and Albertosaurus. If this same social behavior was valid for Tarbosaurus, it would tip the scales in favor of the Tarbosaurus greatly. A fight between a family of Tarbosaurus and a family of Deathclaws might have no winner. So, in conclusion, it is Therizinosaurus and Tarbosaurus that are going to be the biggest problem for the Deathclaws in Mongolia. And while they may match up well against these guys, it's better to avoid them. Threats and competition score 7.5 out of 10, which of course brings us to our final assessment score, 9 out of 10. I don't think there was ever any doubt here. These guys don't really have any setbacks that are going to be crazy impactful on their ability to survive. I don't think these guys are going to need to evolve to be successful, but it wouldn't be an assessing survival video without some Spec Evo. Speculative evolution. Barbarox Khan, the fierce barbaric Khan. In today's Spec Evos, we will be basing the evolutions off of 3 different scenarios, all revolving around how the Deathclaws react to an environment with way more calories than they really need. The first of which is the most obvious and likely scenario. Deathclaws spread like wildfire and absolutely devastate their ecosystem, overhunting and outcompeting theropods like Velociraptor, Tarbosaurus, etc., bringing the ecosystems across Cretaceous Mongolia and beyond to the brink of collapse in less than 1 million years. As a result of this, most of the Deathclaws lose their ability to rely on very little calories, and begin to turn on each other for food, and creating a subset of Deathclaws that only eat other Deathclaws, introducing Barbarox Khan, the new apex predator of Cretaceous Mongolia. These guys are much larger than their ancestors, and unlike them, must eat a lot of food to keep up with this size. This apex predator comes in at a length of 12 meters and a height of about 5 meters, and can weigh anywhere between 1.5 to 3 tons. These guys have adopted a more horizontal posture, though in a much more ape or bear-like fashion. This posture allows them to gallop at a speed of 45 kilometers per hour. Social interaction is often limited to the mating season, and any other time Barbarox encounters another of its kind, it more often than not ends in one individual eating the other. Because the ancestors of the Barbarox chose greed over maintaining their ability to survive on small amounts of food, they do not survive the KT extinction. After quite some time without any large prey items, they inevitably go extinct. Cortegidracos tugus, the horned monster turtle dragon. Now, if you in the past have maybe thought that some of the other Spec Evos I've come up with are ridiculous, grab in Buckaroo because this is by far the most ridiculous one I've made. Instead of overhunting, Deathclaws opt to continue to eat only what they need to survive, eating very few calories relative to their body size. At first, this starts with Deathclaws ambushing animals like Barsboldia and Cerolophus, as these animals have enough calories to satisfy a family of Deathclaws without being too much trouble for them. It doesn't take long for these Deathclaws to realize these hadrosaurs pretty reliably show up to watering holes on a regular basis, so some of the Deathclaws choose to stay by these bodies of water permanently. They continue to use their signature goring technique, killing larger and larger prey items that come to the watering hole, and by extension, getting larger and being able to go for longer periods of time before needing to eat. Enter Cortegidracos tugus, the horned turtle. A truly marvelous and terrifying creature that pushes the theory of evolution to its limits. These predatory death turtles have developed a very unique hunting strategy. Cortegidracos will spend most of their lives in ponds or oases, waiting for herds of titanosaurs to arrive. Upon their arrival, the horned turtle will use its powerful legs and tail to propel themselves with incredible speed and power, and use their massive horn to skewer the unsuspecting sauropod, killing it in an instant. The Cortegidracos will then consume the entirety of the sauropod, everything down to the bones. This meal, depending on the size of the corpse, will usually be enough calories to sustain the turtle for 6 months to a year, and for the following 3 months, the turtle will sleep. Upon waking, the horned turtle will look for a mate, and often won't have to leave their current body of water to do so. If they do have to leave, they will journey as far as 1,000 miles in search of a mate, moving at an impressive speed of just 2 miles per hour. The dimensions of the Cortegidracos are truly daunting. Not including their massive horn, the horned turtle is 10 meters long and 6 meters tall at the apex of their shell, which itself has a radius of 6 meters. They have a shell for a number of reasons, one of which is to of course protect from predators like Tarbosaurus, which may try to take advantage of its slow lumbering gait while it searches for a mate. But the main reason for why they have a shell, and why it's so large, is so that when they do skewer a sauropod, they can withstand the weight of the large dinosaur bearing down on them. The Cortegidracos itself weighs upwards of 40 tons. This is of course an incredible amount of weight. So how does the horned turtle propel itself quickly enough to skewer the sauropod in the air? Well, the horned turtle has monstrously powerful legs that can generate hundreds of thousands of newtons of force to propel themselves up to 5 meters in an instant. In that same instant where they're propelling themselves towards the sauropod, they burn almost 2 million calories doing so, and must immediately start eating the sauropod. They will take the entirety of the following 6 months to a year to recover the calories they burned, while still having enough to keep growing and fight for mating rights. Of course, there's no way this animal survives the KT extinction, and you can probably see why. This ridiculous monstrosity I've created is among the many other animals that are wiped off the face of the earth. Anthranicus mortum, the clawed men of death, or the Clawmen for short. The Anthranicus, or Clawmen, are descendants of the basal Deathclaws placed in Mongolia, who have gone on to spread across all of the Eastern Hemisphere, creating their own cultures and society. You might say, oh, so you've just made them people. And you're partially right. The difference between Clawmen and humans is that the Clawmen have far less pressure to create technology as a survival mechanism like humans do. Deathclaws already come equipped with an arsenal that would put even a knight or samurai to shame, and of course can survive on very little food, making the development of weapons and technology far less important. So why develop a culture and society like humans in the first place? Well, boredom and abnormal levels of aggression is a potent mix. When the Deathclaws had full bellies at the top of the food chain, with nothing to do, they killed each other, claiming other Deathclaws' dens as their own, and placing their own kin in those dens, who then made their own families that would be subordinate to them. They repeated this process many, many times over, until they had armies of fellow Deathclaws, and of course needed a place to house them, as the natural landscape can only provide so much shelter. So they developed things such as axes and saws to make cutting down trees much easier, speeding up the production of shelter. The now bored children, who cannot fight just yet, developed games, art, and traditions that they carry with them into adulthood. The creation of things like weapons only came when the Deathclaws realized that killing things from a distance was easier, fashioning spears made of bone. They have yet to develop any serious type of armor, though they do occasionally wear the skins and hides of dinosaurs, as well as the wing membranes of pterosaurs and the skulls of various dinosaurs to wear as trophies. In just a short 100,000 years, the man-claws go on to inhabit the entirety of the Eastern Hemisphere, with 3 distinct tribes. The original man-claws in Asia, who have become more focused on building the empire that they already have, and looking into agricultural options for food, rather than hunting. A darker-toned, less aggressive species in Europe, who have a focus on taming the land and the dinosaurs that inhabit it, and then a far more aggressive species with a more red volcanic pattern in Africa, who continue to wage war and strike at the other 2 tribes. As the Clawmen evolved, so did their rituals and cultural practices. Marking territory became an elaborate affair, involving the creation of large, visible signs carved into rocks and trees, using the sharp talons they naturally possess. Religious practices, though primitive, have begun to form around the reverence of the largest and most formidable dinosaurs, viewed as deities or spirit guides. The European tribe, with their less aggressive nature, focuses more on harmony with their environment. Their relationship with the local dinosaur population is symbiotic, where they protect certain herbivores from predators in return for the right to herd them as a food source. Meanwhile, the African tribe, marked with their volcanic patterns, thrive on conflict and competition. Their society is built around the glory of battle, celebrating and exalting those who show the greatest prowess and cunning in combat. Intertribal relations are complex, with periods of tense peace interspersed with brutal conflicts. The tribes of Europe and Asia occasionally form allegiances against the aggressive African tribes, especially when their expansionist policies threaten the other tribes' territories. However, when the asteroid inevitably comes, much of Anthranicus society is completely wiped out. However, unlike our other Spec Evos, The Clawmen have retained their traits as hardy beasts built for wasteland, and just barely make it through to the Cenozoic era, where they create a world that is entirely different from the one in our timeline, perhaps completely unrecognizable. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, go ahead, leave a comment, a like, subscribe, maybe even share it to your friends. If you like the channel, you can head on over to the Discord or the Patreon to get a little bit more involved in what goes on. We now have a modded Minecraft server for patrons of all tiers. More on that later on. But yeah, if you have any ideas for what the next video should be, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I love seeing them. Thanks again, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Which brings us to the animals that Deathclaws will be fucking